Hey, good evening, everyone. It is Patrick Lovell, truth bombing on the evening of April 25th, which is a Wednesday, 2023 at 5:26 p.m. my time. And today was one of those days. I just didn't have a whole lot of interest in trying to absorb the interplay of the speculation of all things revolving door and ashes, ashes, fall down for mainstream media in the wake of primarily Tucker Carlson, but also um, Don Lemon. And I was just briefly kind of navigating the spaces out there, but I did come across some things that I thought worth while to blend into just a brief message to you guys based on some other comments that I got on Twitter. So interestingly enough, I was thumbing through some of the speculation of Tucker, most notably initially just because I was somewhat familiar that both these two personalities that I don't really listen to a lot or pay a lot of attention to because they're just interpreting, whatever the cycle is dictating. And Sagar and Genti is definitely one of those guys. Not a lot of deep analysis from him, and a lot of knowledge of really anything. He's definitely chasing the big boys to stay within their algorithms. But it was interesting, and I've heard in the past that he was. I think he came up under Tucker on his show and that sort of thing, and that's where he got to start. And same with whatever that guy's name is, who I can't stand on Rising with Brianna Greyjoy, and I think she's smart, but she's just maybe too smart. And again, everybody's chasing the cycle, right? And so here's all of this much ado about these personalities and why, and it did lead me later and further into I thought a more worthwhile conversation, but I was more interested in it from a standpoint of where they fit in from this perspective. So I checked out Jimmy Dore, and Jimmy Dore has been, on Tucker quite a bit. And of course, anybody who knows Tucker is that he's, supposedly this far right. Well, I guess he is really this, far left, anti-war, anti, I guess, vaccine, predominantly anti-corruption, and funny and interesting to listen to sometimes. But for the most part, again, like everybody else, definitely chasing whatever everybody else is talking about because that's, I guess, what makes him relevant. But one of the guys that he has on his program, who's a decent journalist, a guy by the name of Aaron Mate, and then, of course, their sidekick, whose name I can't remember at the moment, who always has some kind of silly something or other to offer. But they were actually doing this sort of I don't know, this amalgamation of sound bites to prove that Tucker was as genuine a journalist as there is in mainstream media, particularly in primetime. And they basically showed his greatest hits in terms of, well, look, he was, anti um, the pharmaceutical control, and that may have led to his ultimate departure, and a whole host of other, things that he did, in terms of being anti-war and but then again, they just pretty much blot over the whole January 6th insurrection, and then of course everything that Tucker has been engaged with for years that just fuel MAGA and everything that comes with it, which is ridiculous when it comes to ultimately his role in trying to re-edit what we all know the insurrection was. And there seems to be some other potential reasons that Tucker may have been shown the door as rapidly as he had, some of which might be related to a potential lawsuit based on a female producer that has some sort of connotations about I guess what's the word I'm looking for, harassment of some sort, or just maybe the culture as it were, which probably wasn't too different than the O'Reilly culture, so par for the course at Fox. But then the most interesting, I think, speculation that I saw actually came out of Vanity Fair, and I just kind of, I browsed it really quickly, but it was the idea that big man Rupert Murdoch um, found it very cringeworthy that Tucker was so spiritual. considering, or religious for that matter, considering who Fox's audience actually is. So the point is that there's just so much bandwidth and so much speculation and so much like I've got to talk about Tucker and less so Don Lemon, but from the standpoint of where do I fit in the algos? I mean, this is something hot to talk about. Here's our issues. And of course, the far left guys that are anti war, found camaraderie in Tucker's anti war stance. And they also speculated, well, maybe it's because he had RFK Jr. on and some of the things that RFK Jr. stands for, particularly probably anti vaccine and that sort of thing, but he's anti war as well. But because he talks about corruption, the idea being that the guests on Tucker's routine, and I found them to be quite, I mean, it was just like, it was almost gross to see how much they wanted Tucker to know how much they appreciate him. And I just found it all, again, it's just part and parcel, just the lay of the land of media writ large. And I always found those sorts of reactionary scenarios online less important. Every once in a while, like everybody else, I'll tune into them, and sometimes they hit, sometimes they don't. But it doesn't matter if it's mainstream media. It doesn't matter if it's, Joe Rogan or Russell Brand or Jimmy Dore. And they've all basically tried to put their toe in the water of financial corruption and understand the power of the banks. In fact, I've heard Jimmy Dore say on many occasions that the power of the banks, they control everything. And he's right. But he doesn't know how. And he's had guest after guest give him little bits and pieces, but he doesn't understand the full story. And, along those lines, I saw Rachel Maddow, of course, her sort of shock about Tucker, but welcoming to Tucker, being departed, and the reaction from AOC and that sort of thing. But ultimately, it was interesting from her standpoint that, look, it's the discussions online that they're not real journalists and people that are kind of falling prey to Tucker's sort of mechanics of propaganda, if you will, aren't real people, and you can't trust them, and they're all up to no good. And yeah, she was just using it as a kind of a throwaway that those YouTubers, as if she's like the queen of journalism and credibility. I mean, the only thing that I appreciate a lot about Rachel Maddow, especially when she welcomes her guests and she tries to frame how things work and what the story is and her interpretation of it and whether or not she got it right, right? She's asking her guest whether or not she's got it right, as if, she needs their okay to continue forward on the right path so that they're basically lock and step sort of thing, which I don't really think is the purpose of a journalist if that's what she was, but she's not. She's the communication director of the Democratic Party. And then further, I got, several comments today that were interesting on my Twitter feed that were, they range from, some sort of, I don't know, Machiavellian suggestions that, communication is an art form when you're trying to get people to do what you want them to do. And others were like, well, look, there's nothing we can do. We're up against it. The system is so thick and deep and wide and high of obfuscation and corruption that where do you start? Where does it end? There's no way around it. It's too strong. It's too powerful. And so when you put all of those ingredients together into the same casserole and you stir it up and you mix it up, you come up to the revelation and the whole purpose of it, of who I am. I'm a journalist who's already done the work and a producer who's put it all together that reveals how the corruption works. The ABCs, and it's really quite simple when you understand it. And you can see the work at www.thecon.tv. I have a podcast with our friends from The Real Progressives called The New Untouchables, which is quite amazing and just amazing information all over the place, depending on my mood swings, depending on what's happening in the day. But on YouTube and also TikTok, and the title is Patrick Lovell Truth Bombs the Con. And you can find a lot of information there. But just to penetrate the bubble, again, I am trying to foment a movement to purge corruption. Now, I think a lot of people who are probably on my sign cringe when I say crusade. Sorry, it's a crusade to purge corruption. Not in the name of Jesus, not in the name of some spiritual divine that's giving us, causality to defeat evil. No, it's just black and white, bad guys and good guys. It's corruption. It's the revelations of breaking the law and the mechanics of it at every single level. I brought this up in one of my truth bombs last week that Marianne Williamson was getting some traction on TikTok because, she really, I think, has a beautifully eloquent and soulful sort of disposition in terms of the consequences of the system. But it's like explaining a car that is, broken down on the side of the road without understanding what caused it to break down. And it's that simple. That's what I have. And it's not difficult. That's the thing I don't get with this, it hasn't clicked yet. Is it because everybody is so enamored with chasing their tail of what everybody's talking about in the system, which means it's just conformity? But how much more evidence do you need given the years and years and years of what hasn't happened to fix the problems that we have? For those of you who are big fans of Bernie Sanders, he hasn't fixed the problem, nor will he ever. Same with Elizabeth Warren. Quite frankly, AOC is probably relatively intelligent and thoughtful and, probably pretty dynamic and can play the game at a certain level, but that's not fixing the problem, and that's what she was elected to do. I remember famously she said, look, if I don't get this stuff done in my first term, I don't want to go back. Yeah, well, look how that worked out. The paparazzi and celebrity certainly became more, I think, appealing to Miss AOC than the edict of why she was there. But, however it all shapes up, what I'm suggesting to you is that the rotting system of corruption that has destroyed democracy, that has created this corporate fascist state, that is undergirded by a criminal syndicate that uses socialism to guarantee the mob that ultimately fuels fascism, is what we have to defeat. And I have the answers to do that. And it's not rocket science, it's racketeering. If you wanted to, get technocratic, I could talk about all the details of the laws that took place in the deregulation era of the late 90s specifically, and what ultimately happened within the courts and with the judiciary and ultimately with law firms and all the different ways they've been able to reconfigure certain ways that things can be seen and done to be able to manifest things that led to the mess that we're in. And we could talk about that for years and days, and it'll make you go to sleep. Or I could tell you of all of the tragedies of the millions of people that got set up and destroyed and crushed that led to thousands of divorces, tens of thousands probably. Who knows what the real figures are of people that wound up in the streets and suicides and broken families and the soul crushing apparatus of the walls caving in on your head and what that does to your psychology and everything else. That's another side of this whole thing, and a lot of that's on display in all of the work that I mentioned up at at whatever point of this truth bomb. But the nature of what I have got to somehow connect with you and get you to believe is that no one else is coming to the rescue. No one. Not the New York Times, not the Wall Street Journal, not anybody on legacy media, nobody outside of the bubble, if you will. And the politicians, most above all else, aren't going to fix this problem. They have to play the game of the problem to get into positions that they're in. It's corruption that has destroyed everything, and it's worse than you can possibly imagine. And I know a lot of you can imagine a lot, and I'm absolutely convinced there are more good people than evil people, and the idea is that the good have to unite to bulldoze evil. That's it. Sorry to use sort of, I don't know, some people consider that hyperbolic language. Those are what, the polite academics and the professionals within media that allowed all of this to happen, that are completely so disconnected from the reality of what happens under the overpasses and all of the destruction out there in the netherworlds, and people that will never be heard from in the courts that had their houses stolen from them with illegal documentation fraud, and they have no attention to them. Nobody's going to save you. No one. There is no justice except the justice that we make. And the only way it's going to happen that we get a country of, by, and for the people back from a country of, by, and for the corruption is to rip it back. And that's only if you understand how the machine works. And I guess I'm the mechanic that has all the answers. It's in all of my work and it's all of my truth bombs. But we have to unite. If you, me, and everyone you see who isn't a Nazi, who believes in integrity and stability and sustainability and decency and dignity come together, we can purge tyranny. And that could be our destiny, because we've been living, in this death grip, for 20 years. That's sending us off the edge. All of the technology, all of the science, all of the answers regarding paradigms and energy and all of the different scenarios that have led to this nightmare of cataclysmic consequences has not been able to stop the Borg of deception and the diabolical madness of corruption. Because when you parse out, MSNBC to serve this sliver of an audience by doing certain stories that aren't going to tell you the composite. And by the way, that's what Jimmy Dore and Aaron Mate and their sidekick were trying to say, that at least, Tucker Carlson were telling some of the bigger stories. Yeah, he was to a degree, but then he was offsetting it with all of the other stuff that he's involved with, which is insane lies and deception to foment, a white supremacist revolution. Okay, so there's that. But in the end, what you've got in me are literally the answers that came through the top level C-suite executives that revealed all of this information. I've worked with the top cops from the FBI, the DOJ, the SEC to put it all together, and the most important criminologist in history, William K. Black. And why is it important? Well, it's important to know the story in the first place, considering all of the devastation. But ultimately, it's the fact that it led to Federal Reserve Act 13.3, unleashing $30 trillion to a bankrupted criminal financial system that got that way through racketeering. Where in any statute does it say that's the full purpose of the full faith and credit of the United States as lender of last resort? Nowhere, I can assure you. Neither does it, somehow like Rachel Maddow or maybe Barack Obama or somebody like Elizabeth Warren would do some sort of legalese mental, verbal gymnastics to try to dissuade you from understanding what is. And again, I'll just finish with this. Again, it's just freaking, a parable. I mean, it's the Emperor's New Clothes and Humpty Dumpty. We are a fractured, sinking tidal wave train wreck of corruption and deception that is a failed state. I don't accept that. I know millions of you out there don't either. If you invest in this movement, and we're reaching a goal, which is April 30th, which is 6 days away. Like to get 1,300 of you on board, 1,246, let's just call it like that, at $13. If you come on board with a $13 investment and you bring 13 people, you'll get a t-shirt with a great hashtag and a bumper sticker and potentially a sign downstream. But it's really, we've got to build the movement. I'll start with a podcast. We'll create a new media machine. We'll get out on the road eventually if we can grow the circle. And we've got to find, I hate to say it, zealots and crusaders and patriots for liberty and justice for all. And if you're an African American who doesn't like that language because you associate it with some sort of white supremacy, I can assure you that's not the case. This is most importantly a civil rights movement to purge corruption, of which far too many of our African American brothers and sisters have been under the thumb of the machine for the entirety of our country, with a couple of opportunistic moments, specifically from the incredible toil of the civil rights movement, right? But think about everything that came before to get there. I mean, we're still in this massive struggle. And, my colleague pointed it out to me yesterday. When you look at it through the lens of history, I mean, really suffering and transitions and things like that sometimes go on for centuries. Do you have that long to wait? I certainly don't. We have to purge corruption now. We can purge corruption now. If millions of us come together, lock arms, we will bulldoze corruption. Failure is not an option. Rise, roar, revolt, onwards and upwards.